I have 8 grams of part A, 8 grams of part B, and I have a paper cup here, and I always purchase my cups with round bottoms. That way resin won't get caught in the crevices of a straight-sided cup. You also want to make sure that your cups are not wax coated. You want an unwaxed cup. The wax will impede the curing of the resin and mess with the surface of the resin on the carbon fiber. What you want to do now is you want to mix this really well. You have a lot of time, a lot of working time, so you want to take your time to mix the resin correctly. Epoxy resin is not like polyester resin. You want to use exact measurements. This resin system is a 1-to-1, so you want exactly half of each part A and part B. So I have 8 grams of part A, 8 grams of part B. It is not like a polyester resin where the more hardener you put in, the quicker it cures. So don't try that with epoxy. You will ruin your epoxy resin system. So let's go ahead and mix this up really well. Always scrape the sides and get as much resin mixed in as you can. Tap your stick to get the resin off the stick and mix this resin really, really well. Take your time to mix it. You have plenty of time to work. I'm going to go ahead and mix the rest of this off camera. We'll come back and we'll put our resin on the tail light assembly. If you're going to skin a part with carbon fiber that is other than black, you want to add a pigment, a black pigment, to your resin system. Otherwise, you're going to get some bleed through of the color from underneath the carbon. In this case, we're using a black tail light assembly, so we don't have to add any color. So we have the resin system mixed up really well now. Let's go ahead and get a stippling brush, and I'll show you how we're going to apply the resin to the tail light assembly. Now you want to put the resin on the tail light assembly smooth, but you don't want to overdo it. Otherwise, all the resin's going to run off and puddle off onto your surface that the tail light assembly is setting on. You want to get the resin smooth and you want to get a good coating, but you don't want it to run off. So we're going to take some resin on a brush and we're going to lightly brush that resin on till we get a nice glossy surface. No dry spots. And you want to get it on so it's not going to run. If you put a lot of it on, it will run off, and then as it cures, it's going to leave a bead on there, and you don't want that because that will show up in your finished carbon. Notice I'm also getting the edges really well. You want that carbon to stick to the edges. Now we got the resin on the tail light assembly. We're now going to let this tack up. It should take approximately 3 hours, but every once in a while, keep your bowl of resin and come in and tap it with the brush. When you don't see any marks in your resin, then you can touch it with your finger. You want it just slightly tacky. So we're going to let this set now, and then we're going to come back after it tacks up, and we're going to put the carbon fiber ply down onto the tail light assembly. Okay, it's been about 3-4 hours. We're now going to take and put the carbon on, and we're very gently going to line this up. And you notice there's just a teeny bit hanging over the edge. So that will make a nice edge to trim on. Now we have a different resin system. This is an epoxy resin system that has a UV additive. It also has a self-settling additive. So when we put this on, and it's also very clear, when we put this on, we're going to brush on a coat. We're going to block this up so that it's pretty level. So we want the resin to settle over the top of this. Then what we want to do is let this set for 5 hours. Then we want to come in and put another coat on top. We'll hit it with a heat gun. Then we'll let it cure overnight. And then at that point, we can lightly sand it. We can either put another coat, because what you don't want any pinholes or any bumps or pits or anything. Again, depending on how that finish comes out, it will depend on how many additional coats of clear resin we want. Then at the very end, we want to lightly sand the surface and come in with a UV additive clear gloss on top. So what we're going to do, let's go ahead and mix up some resin at this point. The new resin system that is for, usually this is like a tabletop resin or very clear resin. Again, it has UV additive. It also has a self-settling agent in it. So let's go ahead and mix up some resin, and then we'll coat this tail light assembly carbon that we just laid up. We have the resin mixed up now, and what we're going to do is apply the resin, and we want to impregnate the fiber with the resin. So we definitely want, this is called stippling. You want to stipple or tap the fabric with the brush so the resin really wets out the fabric, and you want as much of it to go into the resin and not sit on top of the fabric, at least the first coat. We'll get into later the next coat. We want to start building up the top layer so you'll get that really beautiful three-dimensional depth of the carbon fiber. Now, once we get it wetted out, you'll notice that the resin is going to start to settle. What we want to do is get our heat gun, and we want to come in and we want to hit the fabric to try to burst any pinholes and bubbles. What you can do is take some resin and touch up the areas. And if you see any dry spots, you want to make sure you get the resin on the dry spots. And if the resin is, or if the carbon fiber is lifting at all, you want to tap the carbon fiber down onto the taillight assembly. You don't want it lifting. So notice on this edge it was lifting a little bit. So we definitely want to tap that down. Make sure you really get around the external edge. Okay, we'll hit it with a little more heat. And this again will pop any bubbles, smooth out the resin a bit. Now, we're going to let this sit for around 5 hours till it again starts to tack up and become firm. Then we can come on and put another coat. The second coat should be a lot smoother and flow a lot better. And then after that, it just depends on what kind of surface quality you're going to get. You may need a third coat. You may only need 2 coats. After we put on the second coat, we can let it cure overnight. And then we can lightly sand. And then we can either put another coat on or we can clear coat. It just depends with the spray. It just depends how our final surface is starting to look. So let's go ahead and let this set for a while. It's been now 5 hours and the resin has tacked up very nicely. We've mixed up another batch of resin and now we're going to put the second coat on. Again, we want to put it on not too thick, thin enough to fill in some of the indentations in the carbon and start gently filling in to give ourselves a nice three-dimensional effect. We're now going to hit the carbon with some hot air to smooth it out and remove any air bubbles. You probably can't see it on camera, but as I hit it with the air gun, you can see little bubbles popping on the surface of the resin, which is a good thing. Now we'll take some more resin and fill in the little holes left by the air bubbles. Now we're going to let this resin cure all night, and we'll then take it out on the belt sander and clean up the outside edge. We'll lightly sand the surface, then we'll come in with a third coat, and then after another 5-hour wait, then we'll take a look, see how the resin is doing. We may do a fourth coat, or we may sand and do a clear coat. We'll evaluate that after the cure tomorrow. Here's the next day after the resin has cured. I've masked off everything after sanding all of the carbon fiber. And I'm going to come in and repaint some of the black around the lip of this. And then at that point, after it cures, then we will pull the tape off, and we will shoot some clear coat on top, and then I'll show you the results. Here's the taillight assembly after we've shot some black around the outside edge, and after we've sanded the carbon fiber, first with 100 and then with 320 grit. Now what we're going to do is we're going to shoot some clear coat on the top, and first we'll tape around the upper black portion so we won't get any clear coat there, and then we're going to go ahead and shoot the clear coat. So I'll show you when we're doing that. We've shot 6 coats of clear, let it cure for 48 hours, and now we've sanded with 320 grit, and that has pretty much removed all of the pinholes. We had to do a lot of filling, and we sanded through those pinholes. Now it's looking pretty smooth, so what we're going to do now is go out and shoot some more clear on top and see how this comes out, and that will determine whether we have to shoot some more clear or not, or we can just hit it with the Meguiar's Ultra Cut polishing compound, or Ultra Cut first and then polishing compound second, and see how it finishes up. This is after 6 coats of clear, 6 light coats with 30 minutes between coats. Now we're going to let it cure for 48 hours, and then we're going to lightly buff it out with some ultra light polishing compound. A couple of notes: when you're putting the tape on to laminate the carbon, make sure you give yourself a little gap all the way around, because if the resin gets onto the masking tape, it's going to be really hard to pull off. I had to use an X-Acto knife to remove the tape and then lightly sand around the edges. So go ahead and do that. And so we're going to let this cure for 48 hours, hit it lightly with some polishing compound, and then we'll be ready to mount it on the taillight assembly of the motorcycle. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time.